little girl sat in her room. Her messy brown hair were put into little pigtails as her hazel eyes stared at the door. She hugged her stuffed giraffe close to her little body and listened closely to the loud yells of her father and mother. "I never should have had any damned kids," screamed a loud, deep voice. "All they do is make messes, complain, draw on the walls." He was cut off by the high, angered yell of the girl's mother. "They're children, David. They don't know any better." "Oh, fuck me, Mary Beth. I don't want to hear your bullshit excuses. I've had just about enough with them." "And what do you plan to do about it?" The girl heard loud footsteps coming towards her room, and she hugged her giraffe closer. The door was violently opened, and in the doorway stood her large, angry, overweight father. In one of his meaty hands he held a large textbook. "David, stop it!" screamed her mother. But the father ignored his wife's pleading cries. He grabbed the little girl by the collar, and she screamed and kicked, trembling and shaking in fear. The girl's father harshly held up the textbook. "This is for drawing on my fucking walls, you little bitch!" Years later, the little girl known as Natalie was now 9 years old. Going through the stage of puberty, she was naturally a little chubby. Like the usual, she sat in her room watching TV. Her dad was ranting on about some economic crap that she really could give less a shit about, as she munched on some popcorn. She was already currently drawing a picture. There was a bit of gore in it, but strangely, she really liked drawing blood. It gave her some weird satisfaction. Other than that, multitasking was no problem for her. It became apparent to her at a young age, after having to do so much hard work and labor, that she was able to do so many things at once. Drawing ended up being her talent and passion. It was her way from escaping from reality, whenever something bad would rear its ugly head and peer in, or when she was simply bored. She suddenly heard the closing of her door and looked to the left, pausing on munching on her popcorn. There stood her brother Lucas, who was 14 years old. "What is it?" She could still hear her father's yelling from outside her door. "Dad scaring you?" He let out a chuckle. "No way. I think we're both used to his yelling by now." There was a long pause. "So why are you in here?" He seemed to play with his sleeve slightly and twitch a bit. "I have to ask you something." He trained his eyes on her. She frowned slightly, growing impatient with her brother interrupting her movie and drawing. "What?" He moved a little closer. "You said you wanted to be cool and grow up like a teenager, right?" She nodded. "Well, I have an offer." "Just spit it out, you dimwit." "You know what guys and girls do together sometimes, right?" The next day at school, Natalie did not say a word. She did not speak for the whole day. She didn't have anyone to speak to anyways. Nobody could know. Nobody should know. And so, nobody would know. Her teacher picked up on a few of her puzzled expressions, but she dismissed it as if she just did not understand the lesson. Natalie also felt as if she was in severe pain. She had no idea it could hurt. Feeling scared, she walked home and silently went to her room. But later in the day, she was once again greeted by her brother. Nobody would know. At school, she finally decided to tell someone. Even though they weren't her friends, she just felt she had to. She walked up to a group of girls she would occasionally see in the hallway. They looked like nice girls, and them and Natalie had occasionally talked before. "Hey, Mia?" The ginger girl looked over at Natalie, having a straight face. "Yeah?" I really need to talk to you about something. It's been going on for a while, and you and your friends, well, I feel like you're the only people I can trust." Mia and her friends seemed to pull little smirks, but only for a moment. Little did Natalie know that they were hungry for gossip. "Alright, you can trust us. What's up?" One day later was all it took. She had been getting constant remarks on social networking sites such as Facebook. One time, someone even called her a whore. Not to mention, their lunch ended up getting in her hair. It was going to be the least of her problems, but Natalie, being only 9, could not help but be greatly upset at this fact. However, she did not cut, she did not peep, and she never said a word about it. As you may recall so far in this journey, she had kept everything inside. She supposed it was better. She wouldn't let any pain get the best of her. 3 a.m., school night. Her mother was going to kill her. The girl known as Natalie was now 16. She was productive in high school, close to the honor roll. For once, she felt calm and happy, though, like the usual, she would occasionally become a hermit in her room, hiding away from her dad, who still liked to constantly yell and baby about economy and money and politics and all this bullshit that she was flat out tired of hearing. Her eyes started to feel heavy. She had an assignment to work on, but that was no longer important to her. All that was on her mind was sleep. She closed her laptop, and after her eyes adjusted to the darkness slightly, she saw her old, worn-down stuffed giraffe in the corner. She stared at it in complete and utter silence. Memories passed through her mind and she felt tears come to her eyes. But quickly, she blinked them back. "No more breaking," she thought to herself, but she continued to stare at it. "What the fuck are you looking at?" she said to the stuffed object. It simply stared back with soft, black, beady eyes. She shook her head and stood up. She looked down sadly at the little toy animal and gently picked it up in her arms. She cradled it and spoke softly to it. I'm sorry." Some tears ran down her face. She pet its rough, short fur softly as she lied on her bed. She slowly went to sleep. She was woken up by the angry growls of her mother. She tiredly opened one of her eyes. "I can't believe I forgot to take that laptop away. You were on it all night, weren't you?" Natalie sighed and pressed her face deeper into the pillow, hugging her giraffe closer. Her mother sighed and walked out. She took a shower, brushed her teeth, ate some breakfast. She then got dressed. She put on a gray-blue hoodie with fur on the inside and the hood. It wasn't her favorite, but it was the only one she could wear to school due to the others being in the wash. She also put on black jeans and some thin, fashionable boots. She then finally went downstairs to get driven to school. She hopped in the car, and her mom sped off towards the school. However, on the way there, due to lack of sleep, she slowly put her head against the window of the car and started to drift off. Her dreams, or nightmares, I should say, consisted of her physical abuse as a child. Secondly, the sexual abuse from her own brother, Lucas, that lasted for 4 years before she had the guts to turn him off. She started twitching and cringing in her sleep, but her mother took no notice. Her mother never took notice. She was suddenly sharply awoken by the sound of her mother. "We're here!" having an annoyed tone, most likely from her sleeping. She looked at the large sign of the school that read, Walkerville Collegiate Institute for the Creative Fine Arts. She sighed tiredly and stepped out, putting her backpack on her shoulder. "See ya," she proclaimed, closing the car door. She walked into the school and chatted with a couple of friends until she went up to her locker on the 3rd floor. She grabbed her books, and before the 5 minutes of time was over, she ran to class. Her English teacher annoyingly put her hand on Natalie's desk. "Where's your assignment, miss?" Natalie swallowed. I forgot it at home. Sorry, Miss Homenewick." "Your time is up. Don't disappoint me." Natalie seemed puzzled by the thought for a moment. She didn't know why, but those words seemed to melt through her. She simply ignored it and went back to listening to the lesson, falling asleep not too long after, of course. Later that day, she was heading to her locker for 4th period, when suddenly her boyfriend Chris came up to her. "Hey, talk to me after school, alright?" She smiled, loving to talk to Chris. Though strangely, she didn't suspect anything. He was always such a sweet guy. During her French class, she dared not to pay attention. Instead, she doodled the things she loved to draw. Blood, gore, people being stabbed, knives, and macabre things of the such. Other people would say it was pretty dark of her to draw such things, but she saw nothing wrong with it. For a strange reason, it actually felt like a normal thing to her.
Oh, Miss Arlette.
She quickly covered her doodle on her paper and looked up at her French teacher quickly, trying to hide her fear. Yes, Mr. Levasseur? He gestured for her to move her arm with a slight turn of his head.
Show me your work.
She hesitantly moved her arm to show the picture of someone getting stabbed by an insane man. The teacher stared puzzled, looking at her a bit. She smiled nervously.
Oh, erase that and get started on your work,
he said in a strangely calm voice. He walked away and she sighed and began to erase the picture.
Oh, and Miss Arlette.
She looked up at him slightly.
Your time is almost up on getting your work done. I suggest doing it now.
She growled at the remarks. Time always seemed to be against her. As far as she could care, time could go fuck itself. After class, she walked out of the school to find her boyfriend standing near the fence on the sidewalk. She smiled and walked over, hoping her day could at least be cheered up by him. But as she walked closer, her smile slowly faded. He wasn't smiling back. Chris, what's wrong? What did you want to talk to me about? He sighed.
Natalie, I think it's time that we should start seeing other people.
She felt her heart break. But why? He gave her a bit of a stern look.
It's your mindset. Your drawings, they just creep me out. I think there's really something wrong with you, and the saddest part is, why haven't you told me why you're acting like this? It makes me feel irresponsible, so I can't do it anymore. I'm sorry.
And with that, he began to walk away. Natalie slammed her hands on the bathroom counter at home. She stared at herself in the mirror, her eye twitching. I won't hurt myself like the others. I can. I can stay strong. There was a needle and a black thread in her hand. It's pointless. It doesn't help. Some weird sensation pulled at her subconscious. She chuckled slightly. No, I'm doing it because I want to. She held up the needle with thread on the end of it, and she smirked widely. Time is up. Piece after piece, cut after cut. Even though excruciating pain was going through her, she did not whine. She did not whimper. She did not cry. There were no more tears to be shed. All she did was smile. Blood leaked from the pierces and made a low, dripping noise into the sink and onto the counter. When she was finished, she stood back and admired her handiwork. She stroked the horrendous stitches on the side of her mouth that spread into a wide smile. She felt the warm, wet blood on her fingers and licked it gently, consuming the metallic-tasting liquid in pure ecstasy. She stopped when she saw her mother's reflection in the mirror behind her and sharply turned around. She saw her mother's wide eyes and pale face, and she looked at her fingers, seeing the blood. She suddenly felt the pain and she started to cry. Mom? She had never felt so confused. What had just happened to her? Her mother had scheduled some therapy for her. Natalie had gotten rid of the stitches in fear of how much pain it would bring. So she went to the therapist with them. She made sure her hood was up, as not to let anyone see. She sat down on the comfortable leather seat and stared at the blonde woman across from her in silence. So, your name's Natalie, isn't it? Natalie just nodded. I'm Deborah, and I'm here to help. Now tell me, what have been some of your problems recently? Natalie stared. Time has been my problem. Deborah gave her a confused look. What about time, dear? Natalie's hands roughly gripped the leather of the seat. Everything. It makes you live through it, slowly progressing through life, being controlled by society, only to be tortured for seemingly to no end until you find you no longer have a purpose. It's a vicious circle. Time does not end. It does not slow down. It does not speed up. It is violent. It makes you live through the torture over and over again, unable to fast forward any way from it. Natalie really had no idea what she had just said. She felt like she wasn't herself anymore. Could this be because of all the things she had kept contained? No, it was impossible. For some strange reason, she liked it. The therapist leaned closer. Sweetheart, I want you to tell me what's happened to you. Natalie still stared. There was a long pause. She smirked slightly, the pierces from her stitches slightly opening again. Why don't you tell me, Blondie? You're the expert. Deborah seemed to have a bit of an annoyed look. I can't help unless you tell me what's wrong, Natalie. Her fingers started to tear into the leather seating. Natalie isn't here anymore. With that, Deborah's eyes widened and she got up. I'll be right back. Please, 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 please. Stay here. She walked out, leaving Natalie alone. Maybe if she had done something at this point, she wouldn't have come to be what she is today. Maybe more people would be alive, and maybe she would be sane again. As much as I would love to, I would admit that she got up from that chair and stopped this all from happening. But I'm obligated to give you the horrid truth. Natalie did not move. She sat perfectly still, perfectly silent, and perfectly calm in that chair. And after a while of waiting and impatience, her parents finally walked in. She stood, happy to go, but she noticed her parents' expressions. Even her father had a strange, saddened look on his face. Her confusion grew, but she said no words and followed them to the car. On the way where she thought she was going back home, she started to drift off. Strangely, she heard a dark voice speak in her dream. It almost sounded like herself, echoing in eternal blackness. Your time is up. She shot awake, some beads of sweat rolling down her face. She wasn't home. She wasn't in the car. She was in a bed, a white bed, in a white room. She looked to her side, seeing she was hooked up to a heart monitor. She went to get up, but suddenly realized she was bonded down. She panicked. She started to struggle, but paused, hearing a door to her left open. A man in a white shirt looked at her, his hands behind his back. He almost looked like one of those cliché doctors you would find in some scientific lab. She paid full attention as Mr. Scientist started to speak.
You must be very confused right now. I can imagine, but I'm letting you know we're only here to help. Your parents agreed to sign a contract to give you some mental drugs to hopefully help your state of mind.
She opened her mouth to protest but was quickly silenced.
You don't need to worry. You'll be back to normal in no time. Just try to relax.
He walked over and she tried to skittishly move away, but couldn't due to the bonds of the leather straps around her wrists and legs. He carefully took a mask and put it over her mouth and nose.
I recommend you wear 2 masks.
She stubbornly tried to get it off, but felt herself starting to slip under the drugs, and her eyes slowly shut.